what we have to ask ourselves is, why are we here and how do we get here? And think of where we were 3 or 4 short weeks ago. We were at all-time record highs. We had employment numbers Friday that reflected where we were last month. And where we were last month has nothing to do with where we are today. And I think people have to understand that.
But 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were not addressing a pending public health crisis.
Stephanie, I completely agree with that. I said where we are today. So we are now dealing with an economy where there's been massive demand destruction in the oil market. And we saw the demand destruction in the oil market. We saw OPEC try to deal with the demand destruction, how they were going to deal with each other. Would they all cut back on production? There was no agreement reached in cutting back on production. And so the Saudis said, look, if we're not going to agree on all curtailing production, we'll flood the market and we'll show you. We'll take some of you producers that are high-cost producers, and we'll force you to sell every drop of oil you produce at a loss. And we'll see how long you can do that. So we're really having somewhat irrational behavior as people try and protect their own economies right now in this area. In the equity markets, we're now seeing people trying to price in behavior based on the virus. And they're trying to price in, what is a company going to earn next month or next quarter or the quarter after? How long is this going to be? Is this economy going to be like this? Are people going to go out and spend again? Can people go out and spend again? People that want to work, can they work? Can they actually bring home a paycheck?
Okay.
And if they can't bring home a paycheck, it is going to have a direct impact on the economy.
Then let's talk about the policies that are being put in place. Last week when the Fed cut rates, an emergency rate cut, people aren't going to go out and starting a business or buy a home and spend when all the health professionals and corporate leaders are telling us to hunker down and stay home.
Look, this is not a liquidity crisis. This is not an 08 crisis. We have plenty of liquidity in the crisis.
What does that mean?
There is no lack of liquidity in the financial system. Banks are awash with cash. Look, there's people just trying to invest cash overnight, every night. You know, one thing Andrew didn't mention is we've got a 10-year interest rate in the United States today below 50 basis points. We're around 44, 45 basis points in the United States. That's all-time historic lows. We're not there because people want it there. We're there because everyone wants to invest their money in safety and soundness, meaning they're willing to take a much lower rate of return on their money to make sure they get it back. So people are buying U.S. Treasuries at less than 0.5% return because that's where they feel safety and soundness is. So the system that we deal with, the economic system, the market system, is flooded with cash right now. People probably have more cash than they've had in a long period of time because they're consuming less. People are choosing not to travel. You see it in the airport. People are choosing not to go out to dinner. People are choosing not to ride taxis, not to ride Ubers, not to go out and do the things that they're normally doing in the economy. So when the Fed cuts interest rates, it's not going to spur economic growth. It's going to make money cheaper. Money was already cheap and available. Okay. The market had priced it for them.
Then, Andrew, what is this about? Is this about fear and transparency? CNBC reporting right now that trading is halting. If 2 weeks ago the president would have said, let's put a pause on the idea of economic growth and let's address this public health crisis, would we be in a different situation? Because the president, Larry Kudlow, and other members of this administration have been talking up the markets and talking down the virus. And now what are we doing? Hurting both.
Well, look, first of all, the market is now halted. This is exactly what we just talked about literally minutes ago about the idea of a circuit breaker. It's now happened at that 7% level. As to what the president could have done or did do, I think this is much more about testing and whether the CDC could have gotten ahead of this. Clearly, we're behind it. And I think part of the fear factor here for investors is trying to understand the numbers that we do have and how accurate or inaccurate they really are. That's a huge part of this, that ultimately the investment community does not believe those numbers and does not believe, even if you do believe those numbers, that we're going to be able to get ahead of it. You know, thus far, all of the identified cases are relatively in places where the type of workers are service workers. People can do their job over Gmail and Zoom. They can work from home if if ultimately that turns out to be what it is. We have not heard about cases, meaningful cases in places like Detroit or places where we actually manufacture things in real ways. And that's if we have that across the country, it becomes very difficult very, very quickly. I don't, again, want to be alarmist about this, but I think part of the issue that investors are trying to understand is just how long this could go on for and what real impact it's going to have, both on their people's ability to work, which is a supply story, and people's demand story, which is, are they going to go to the shopping mall? People are clearly going to supermarkets to try to get everything off the shelf, but are they going to do anything else? Are they going to get on airplanes? I had a conversation with my great-grandmother last night about getting on an airplane. People are not going to be doing that and shouldn't be doing that. And I think those are the questions. And whether we're ultimately going to, I'd be very curious to hear from Gary, whether we're going to ultimately start talking about bailouts. Are we going to be talking about bailing out the energy industry, the airline industry?
What do you think, Gary?
Look, we're at a point now where we're going to have to talk about how do we sustain an airline industry here in the United States? If consumers stop flying, which they are, Andrew just said his grandmother shouldn't get on an airplane. I happened to fly yesterday, and my daughter flew to Florida. She said, ironically, the plane was quite empty. We're going to need to make sure that we protect our airline industry. Ultimately, we're going to come out of this. And I think that's one of the things I'm trying to say is we don't know how long this is going to last. The only thing I know for sure is we will look back on this at some day in the future and say what we could have and should have done. We're going to have to protect the airline industry. We're going to have to protect workers that can't go to work because A, their job doesn't exist, or B, they may be stuck home taking care of someone who's sick, and they don't have a salaried employee, or they don't have a company that's big enough or strong enough to allow them to receive a paycheck. And so if you're a gig worker in the gig economy today, or you're a service worker out there working for yourself,
8 million people total.
You don't have someone sending you a paycheck. So if you're an Uber driver out there today, anywhere in the world, trying to get a fare and your phone doesn't light up with a fare, you can't create income for yourself. Those are the people we have to take care of. If you work for a large company, you're going to stay on the payroll and you're going to get paid.
Then what do you recommend we do? Andrew Yang has said, let's go universal basic income. Jason Furman wrote on Friday, write $1,000 check to every American. What do you think we should do?
Well, look, I think that's going too far to the extreme. I think we could be more subtle about that because there are a lot of people that will work and there are a lot of people that will stay on the payroll. So number one, we happen to be very lucky that we're in 2019 tax season. So number one is Treasury IRS has to get tax refunds out immediately. So we've got to really speed up the tax refund process for 2019 taxes.
That could get delayed. That could get delayed in Washington.
We cannot let that get delayed. So people that get the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit or Child Care Credit, those are many of the people we're talking about. They need to get those refunds back immediately. Number two, what I would do is I would allow people to borrow against 2020 Earned Income Tax Credits and Child Care Credits. I would allow them to get a basically low interest or zero interest loan against next year's government credit they're going to get. It doesn't cost anything. We've got a 10-year rate now below 50 basis points. Financing hardworking Americans and being compassionate on them, it really has no cost. The cost of money today is almost non-existent.
Andrew, you wrote the book Too Big to Fail. In many of those situations, Gary, you were in the room. When it came to the financial crisis, Hank Paulson and leaders of the financial industry, Andrew, were in the same room saying, how do we solve for this? Right now, when you look at business leaders and our leaders in government, is there any level of trust or communication? Because if you look at the response between the two, they couldn't be more opposite.
I think we're not there yet, and I think we're not there yet for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's not just about getting out your financial bazooka and throwing money at the situation, though I think that's ultimately going to be needed and likely to help. The question is when you do that and based on what information. I think part of the problem is we don't have all of the information that we need. We don't have all of the testing. We clearly don't have a vaccine. We don't even have a timeline for a vaccine. And I think those two component pieces, the actual data and the vaccine, or at least a timeline for the vaccine, are going to be hugely important. Then I think we're going to get into this bailout conversation and what that looks like. And I also think in this political climate, we're going to get into a very interesting conversation, not just about how we deal with employees and whether there's unemployment insurance and the like, but if we do get into bailing out an airline, for example, are we going to be having a conversation about corporate socialism? Are we going to have a conversation about what we're going to get back from those airlines, given how much anger there was about what was given to banks and what was given to the automakers? I mean, all of this is going to become a very interesting conversation, unfortunately, and I imagine it's going to happen soon, but I think it's a little too soon yet before we get there.
But Gary, and I know we have to go, wouldn't you think public outrage would be different this time? In the financial crisis, the public was furious with banks or the auto industry because it was human-made. In this case, doesn't this get looked at like a natural disaster? Nobody's blaming the airline industry or the cruise industry.
I do hope that people look at this a little bit differently. But again, it's hard to predict people's behavior and how they're going to look on this with the whole socialism that we've looked at and the way that people think about corporate America today. They think differently than they did even 10 years ago. And they definitely think differently than they did during the financial crisis. I do believe that we are going to need the government to step in and help certain industries. And there's certain part of this country that doesn't believe that the government should come in and help certain industries, and the industries should stand on their own 2 feet. But look, we are not having totally rational consumer behavior right now.
Well, we're not getting honest information, Garrett, or enough information.
I don't know if we're getting honest or enough. I don't know who knows what.
Hold on a second. I know we're out of time, but can you actually say to me, you don't know if we're getting honest information? 2 weeks ago, the president said the number is 15, it's going to 0. The number's over 500. So you can't say to me, you don't know if we're getting honest information, because we're not.
Well, I'm not here to argue the numbers. Look, I do agree with the experts on this. So when Scott Gottlieb comes on or Tom Bossert says certain things, I know they've spent a lot of time studying this, so I respect their opinion.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.